bored at home. I sent a message to my best friend. Can you tell your brother to come and keep me company tonight? My best friend was a bit hesitant but still agreed. Half an hour later, looking at the tall and handsome guy standing at my door, I fell into deep thought. He raised his eyes faintly and glanced at me. When did you find out? Me? Huh? When did you find out that I like you? My parents went on a trip, then left me alone at home. I lazed around at home for several days. I was so bored that I was going crazy. I scrolled through my moments and happened to find that my best friend Renee had returned from her hometown. I directly sent her a message. Have you returned to BIJ in She City? After getting an affirmative reply from her, I immediately sat up in excitement as if recovering from a serious illness. I typed rapidly on my phone. Can you tell your brother to come and keep me company at my house tonight? Renee's brother Ryan is 2 years older than us, but he is stricter with her than their parents. He never allows her to stay overnight outside. I still remember that on the night after the college entrance examination, I secretly took Renee to sing all night at a KTV. In the middle of singing, her brother came. Tall and strong, he exuded the aura of a counter-tertiary Miss Elite. Just one glance from him scared me half to death. Since then, I have been quite afraid of her brother. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't casually ask Renee to stay overnight outside. But I've been alone at home for 10 days. I'm so bored that I'm almost going crazy. In the chat box, the words typing flickered on and off. Finally, a message was sent. Renee, this isn't very appropriate, is it? I sighed and persuaded earnestly. I know your brother is difficult to deal with, but if you talk to him nicely, he will definitely agree. Just for one night. Your brother can't be so stingy. I'm really lonely and cold at home. Under me coercion, inducement, and pitiful pleading, Renee wavered a bit. Then I'll go and talk to my brother? Me. Go quickly. While waiting, I played with my phone. About 20 minutes later, Renee replied. Renee, my brother agreed. It took 20 minutes to reply. It seems that it's really not easy to persuade Ryan. I rubbed my hands in excitement. When will he arise? Renee, in about half an hour. After a while, she asked me again, are you so happy? I didn't hesitate at all. Of course. I'm extremely happy. Renee. I really couldn't tell before. Renee actually doubts our revolutionary friendship? I was about to condemn her when I saw her say that her phone was out of power, and she had to charge it first. Putting down the phone, I stood up and tidied up the room briefly. I also changed my sheets and quilt cover. Tonight, I can sleep with the sweet and soft Renee. Two ding dong. Ding dong. When the doorbell rang, I was watching TV. Hearing this sound, I directly threw the remote control in my hand and rushed to the door. Without hesitation, I pulled the door open. Renee, I fucking miss you. The voice stopped abruptly. The smile froze on my face, and I even forgot how to close my big grin. I looked at the tall man standing at the door with a confused expression. The man was wearing a black windbreaker and had short, neat hair. His sharp eyebrows and eyes, combined with his 100 Texas cm height, were very imposing. I unconsciously took a step back and said in confusion, Lynn, brother Ryan? My mind was racing. Why is he here? Could it be that he's not even about this short distance and has to personally send Renee here? I subconsciously stuck my head out and looked behind him. Where's Renee? Hidden somewhere? I didn't see anyone. Ryan looked down at me, and I looked up at him. The height difference was a bit large, and the atmosphere was very awkward. I forced a smile. Brother Ryan, why are you here? Ryan looked at me for a few seconds, leaned against the door frame, and raised an eyebrow. Didn't you say you were lonely and cold and told Renee to ask me to come and keep you company? Me. At that moment, I felt like a nuclear bomb exploded in my head. It blew my already limited brain to pieces and I couldn't think at all. Vroom. Vroom. The phone vibrated twice. I almost unlocked it with trembling hands. Renee, my brother should be almost there. Right? Chloe. Have you seen him yet? Slap. I expressionlessly closed the door. After calming down for 3 seconds. I think I know what's going on. What on earth is in Renee's clever head? I asked her to come and keep me company. But what did she understand? I know she has a wild imagination. But I never expected it to jump to the Pacific Ocean. But no matter how I thought about it, I couldn't figure it out. Why would Ryan agree to such an absurd request? After calming down for a while, I took a deep breath and opened the door. I planned to explain clearly to Ryan and send this big Buddha away. But when I looked up, there was no one. I looked down. He was squatting on the ground, his head down, not knowing what he was doing. I was stunned. What's wrong? Ryan paused and looked up at me. Me. Why is there blood all over his handsome face? Ryan covered his nose. His voice muffled. You can close the door a bit harder. I quickly realized what had happened and froze all over. This seems to be my fault? I quickly stepped aside. Brother Ryan. Come in and clean up first. I'm really sorry. I suddenly remembered that my house wasn't tidied up just now. So I was in a hurry when I closed the door. Ryan was washing his face in the bathroom. And I was sitting on the sofa in a daze. With this interruption, I even forgot the draft I had prepared earlier. The sound of running water came from the bathroom and stopped after a while. Ryan came out of the bathroom. I turned my head to look and then froze. His windbreaker was casually wrapped around his waist. The white short-sleeved shirt he was wearing close to his body became somewhat transparent because it was stained with water. Ryan has an excellent figure. He belongs to the type that looks thin when dressed and has muscles when undressed. Looking at the faintly visible muscle contours under his clothes, I couldn't help but feel my face heat up. Well, I admit it. I was a little tempted. In just a few seconds, I forgot what I should say again. Ryan sat down opposite me on his own. He wiped the water off his face and looked up at me, opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but hesitated a little. Looking at his hesitant appearance, I was curious and said, Brother Ryan, what do you want to say? Ryan paused and slightly lowered his eyes. Nothing. I just want to ask you one thing. I was a little nervous. If he asked me why I asked him to accompany me, how would I explain? Push the blame on Renee? That doesn't seem very kind. I mustered up my courage and said, Ask. He didn't speak immediately. Only after a few seconds did he look at me faintly. When did you find out? Me, huh? He looked straight at me. When did you find out that I like you? I looked at him with a blank face. And my mind seemed to be filled with paste. Who likes whom? Why can't I understand this sentence? Ryan looked at me for a few seconds, stood up on his own, and when passing by me, he reached out and ruffled my hair. You're really just like what Renee said. Not ticklish at all. He walked so fast that I didn't even see his expression clearly. Of course. This is not the point. The point is that Ryan is actually a fake serious person. For when Ryan came back from making a phone call on the balcony, I had already wrapped myself into a silkworm cocoon with a blanket and was lying straight on the sofa. I thought it over. Instead of explaining the truth to him and making 3 people embarrassed at the same time, it's better to go along with the mistake. Ryan looked down at me. You. I pointed to my room. Brother Ryan. You can sleep in that room tonight. Ryan was silent for a few seconds, not knowing what he was thinking. After a moment, he walked up to me. You go and sleep in the room. I'll sleep on the sofa. I shook my head vigorously. No need. No need. I'm fine sleeping on the sofa. Ryan, you still. Before he could finish speaking, I shook my head like a rattle drum. It's decided so happily. Ryan looked down at me. I closed my eyes and didn't speak. I heard him ask, really not getting up? I shook my head, not getting up. As soon as the words fell, a shadow was cast above me. Ryan bent down and picked me up horizontally with me and the blanket. I opened my eyes in horror and looked at him. Ryan carried me into the room expressionlessly, and then placed me steadily on the bed. Your bed is too soft. I'm not used to sleeping on it, he explained. I hid my face in the blanket, and only showed my eyes, looking at him without blinking. After all, I really don't want him to see my flushed face. That's too embarrassing. Ryan walked a few steps out, and then stopped. He leaned against the door and added, I can only accompany you for one night. I have to return to the team early tomorrow morning. He is a firefighter and is on vacation at home these 2 days. As soon as I thought that I had occupied his precious vacation, my sense of guilt directly exploded. I quickly nodded. He looked at me, paused. You can call Renee over to accompany you tomorrow. Hearing this, my eyes lit up directly. Ryan reached out to turn off the light for me, and then closed the door. I heard an extremely low, good night. The room fell into darkness, and even the air became silent. I pulled off the blanket covering my face and let out a long breath. Ryan is not right today. Very not right. But I also vaguely feel that I seem to be a little not right today. When I got up early the next morning, Ryan had already left. The blanket on the sofa was folded neatly, and the living room was also cleaned spotlessly. Looking at the breakfast left on the table, I couldn't help but sigh. Is this the happy life of Renee? Having a brother like a snail is so great. 5 in the coffee shop. Renee almost spat out a mouthful of coffee. Who? Who are you talking about? Renee stared at me with wide eyes. My brother has never done housework for me at home. I was stunned. In your family, you do all the housework? Renee pouted. Not really. We all do our own things. She thought for a while and explained, you don't have to feel too burdened. My brother may just not be familiar with you. So, well, I don't know what he's thinking either. He is very strange. Don't think too much about it. As she said that, she took out a box from her pocket. Quickly see what gift I brought you. Ryan's matter was quickly forgotten by me. After shopping with Renee for a whole day, I felt extremely comfortable. That night, Renee came home with me. The two of us lay on the bed chatting about everything, from entertainment stars to campus gossip. The atmosphere was great. Not knowing what I thought of, I turned to ask her, your brother is 27 this year, right? Renee nodded. He'll be 28 in 3 months. I was puzzled. Didn't he find a sister-in-law for you? Renee had an expression of an old person on the subway looking at a mobile phone. Where can that dull gourd find a partner? Only his good looks are still acceptable. After saying that, she paused and turned her head to look at me sinisterly. Chloe, you can't have a crush on him, right? My heart skipped a beat. Before I could say anything, she grabbed my shoulder and shook it vigorously. Chloe, wake up. Ryan is unromantic and boring. Don't be deceived by his face. My brain feels like it's been shaken up. I stammered. I understand. Not long after, Renee, who was extremely tired, fell asleep beside me. I lay on the bed, looking up at the ceiling, and her words from just now came to mind. Lacking in sentiment? But I vaguely remembered that when I first met Ryan, he didn't seem so proper either. Back then, he would even whistle at me. Summer 2009. I successfully entered high school and also met my good friend Renee. Because we have similar personalities, Renee and I always have endless things to talk about. We often make plans to go out and play together during holidays. After running wild outside for a few days, we were blocked. Several spirited guys with yellow hair blocked us in an alley. You little sisters are quite rich. You've come here to eat and watch movies for 3 consecutive days. Well, how about lending some money to your brothers to spend? Renee was extremely scared and was about to reach for the money. I pulled her behind me. Don't take it. Once you do it, there will be a second and a third time. They will pester you. Seeing the duck that was about to be in hand fly away, the leader became furious and walked over. What are you? This little bitch. Saying? He raised his hand to hit me. I subconsciously hugged my head and squatted down. Ah! A scream rang out in front of me. I couldn't help but look up. That yellow-haired guy was covering his head and jumping around in place. A small stone rolled under his feet. Renee exclaimed in surprise. Brother? Following her gaze, I saw someone squatting on the wall. He tossed the stone in his hand and looked at those people. With his chin raised. Looking extremely unruly. You dare to rob my Ryan's sister? Those people's expressions changed. After looking at each other for a moment, they reluctantly turned and left. They also muttered under their breath, "What bad luck! How did we run into him?" That was the first time I saw Ryan. He had broad shoulders and long legs, with a neat crew cut. His skin was tan and dark. Looking a bit ruffian is a chalwai handsome. Ryan whistled down at me condescending. What are you looking at? I almost nervously looked away. Later, from Renee's explanation, I learned. So he was the unruly brother that Renee had mentioned. But how did that once so flamboyant and unrestrained teenager turn into an old stick in the mud? I think this is a question worthy of deep thought. My thoughts gradually returned. Sleepiness overcame me. I turned over, hugged the sweet and soft Renee, and fell asleep. 6 the next morning. My home was gone. I heard that during the renovation downstairs, the load-bearing wall was accidentally smashed. Now our entire building has become a dangerous building. When the property management came to the door, Renee and I had just woken up. With messy hair. We were both stunned. It took me a long time to say, "So, my home is uninhabitable now?" The other party nodded with difficulty. I asked again, "Then which street do you think is more suitable for me to sleep on?" The other party didn't speak. I called my parents and then followed other residents to go through procedures and formalities everywhere. The day passed in a flash. Renee was also exhausted from running around. Until it got dark. Renee and I ate a bowl of noodles at a noodle shop across the community. Renee let out a belch and patted her stomach. "Let's go." I was stunned. "Where to?" Renee pulled me up. "Of course to my house. We can wait for your parents to come back to deal with anything." She pulled me out. I realized belatedly, but I didn't bring anything with me. "Renee, I have everything there." Half an hour later, I stood at her doorstep. Renee pulled me inside. I grabbed the door frame. "Wait a minute." I looked at her. "Is your brother at home?" Renee patted my arm. "Don't worry. He's not at home." I don't often come to Renee's house. Being a bit afraid of Ryan is one aspect. On the other hand, her family has a little corgi, and I am naturally allergic to dog hair. Renee looked at her house with flying dog hair everywhere and turned to me with an embarrassed smile. "Chloe, why don't you sleep in my brother's room for one night tonight?" I looked at her and twitched the corner of my mouth. "Forget it." Taking the blanket from her hand, I walked towards the living room on my own. "I'll make do on the sofa for one night." Renee couldn't persuade me and had to agree. After a simple wash, I lay contentedly on the sofa. I was so tired today that almost in no time, sleepiness overcame me. I don't know how long it had been before I was woken up by the faint noise coming from outside the door. I took out my phone and took a look. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. Click. In the dead silence, the sound of the door opening was clear. The sleepiness disappeared instantly. I slightly raised my head and looked at the door, nervous as if I could hear my own heartbeat. A tall figure opened the door and walked in. I instantly breathed a sigh of relief. It was Ryan. But didn't he say he wouldn't come back? I didn't move. I was thinking about how to greet him awkwardly yet politely. Before I could think it through, I saw him come over to the sofa without turning on the light. He casually threw his backpack on the sofa. Very good. It landed precisely on my stomach. In order not to scare Ryan, I very difficultly screamed. I was about to speak. But in the next second, Ryan took off his coat and fell back beside me. His strong arm was draped over my waist. 3 seconds later, even breathing came. Me. How tiring must this be? Falling asleep in just 3 seconds. I didn't dare to move at all. I was planning to wait until he was sound asleep and then find an opportunity to get up. This posture is so awkward. 10 minutes later. I took a deep breath and carefully lifted his arm away. The level of caution was no less, and Fusingle and mine. I silently counted in my heart, 3, 2, 1. As soon as I exerted force with my hand, the owner of the arm moved. Ryan turned over completely. The arm draped around my waist pulled me in. In just an instant, I was in his arms. Me. 7. He held me in his arms like holding a plush doll. I was so shocked that I even forgot to breathe for a moment. Ryan's scorching body temperature enveloped me. I only felt fireworks exploding in my head. After calming down, I tried to move. Failed attempt. He was holding me too tightly. I couldn't move at all. Really having no other way. I reached out and poked his lean waist. Called out softly, "Brother Ryan. Wake up." He didn't move. I paused and poked again, "Wake up." He still didn't wake up. I was a bit anxious and reached out to poke him again, but this time before I could even touch his waist, my wrist was grabbed by him. I looked up in horror. In the dark living room, Ryan was looking at me with half-opened eyes. His eyes glimmering slightly. My nose touched his chin. And the atmosphere gradually began to feel not quite right. Perhaps it was never right from the beginning. Seeing that he was awake, I almost immediately tried to crawl out of his arms. But just as I had gotten up halfway, Ryan pulled me down again with his arm. His voice was a bit hoarse. "Don't move." Me. I was about to go crazy with anxiety. What's wrong with Ryan? In the next second, Ryan placed his chin on my head and gently rubbed it. There was inexplicably a flavor. I was stunned for a moment. And then I heard his muttering. "It was so hard to dream of you. Chloe. Help. I feel like I might be having auditory hallucinations." Slap. The living room light suddenly turned on. Renee appeared sleepily at the entrance of the living room. "What's wrong with Chloe?" I seemed to hear just now. 6 eyes met. And the entire living room fell into a deathly silence. After a few seconds, Renee shouted angrily, "Ryan! Take your dirty hands off me." Ryan probably also figured out the current situation. He turned and glanced at me. A flash of panic passed through his eyes. The hand on my waist immediately withdrew as if it had been burned. He rolled over with such a big movement that he rolled onto the ground. Then he quickly got up from the ground and rushed into his room. His back wasn't. In an instant, only Renee and I were left looking at each other in the living room. Renee rushed into Ryan's room to sacrifice family for righteousness. And I sat on the sofa in a daze. Ryan's words just now kept replaying in my mind. "It was so hard to dream of you, Chloe." I also thought of the last time Ryan went to my house. What did he ask me at that time? He asked me, "When did you find out that I like you?" Although he later changed the topic in a joking tone. But now thinking about it, his expression was very abnormal at that time. My mind was a bit chaotic. But even so chaotic, I could still easily draw a ridiculous conclusion in the end. Ryan. He seems to really like me. Before I could figure it out, Ryan's door was opened. He walked out first, with no expression on his face. But I still noticed his slightly red earlobes. He walked up to me. The tightly pursed corner of his mouth exposed his nervousness. Ryan's voice was a bit low. "I'm sorry just now. I was half asleep." I was stunned for a moment and subconsciously replied, "It's okay. I can understand." He paused and asked me again, "Did I talk in my sleep just now?" I was silent for a few seconds and smiled at him. "No. Does Brother Ryan have the habit of talking in his sleep?" Ryan let out a sigh of relief, rubbed his temple, and looked extremely tired. He apologized to me again before going back to his room. Renee was afraid that I was scared and also sat on the sofa and chatted with me for a while. It wasn't until late at night that I lay down again. However, I couldn't fall asleep anymore. 9. I lied to Ryan. because I found that I actually knew nothing about him. Lying on the sofa, memories of Ryan flashed through my mind like a revolving lantern. In high school, Renee and I were in grade 10, and Ryan was in grade 12. And the time when I had the most interactions with him was when I followed Renee to the roadside internet cafe after school to call Ryan home. What else? Also, he would occasionally pass by our class and throw a lollipop to me and Renee through the window. Do you like it? I didn't see it at all. For a while, I even thought that Ryan actually didn't like me very much. I remember it was the first semester of senior year too. Ryan repeated a year. That evening, a handsome boy in my class invited me to the Grove. He blushed and handed me a love letter. That was the first time I received a love letter. My whole face flushed red. Standing there, I didn't know what to say. Chloe. You. Before the boy opposite could finish speaking, a frivolous and familiar whistle came from above. I looked up. Ryan was standing by the window of the adjacent teaching building and looking this way. I subconsciously hid the love letter behind me. But he laughed. Then he shouted to a place not far away, Teacher GE. There are people dating here. Teacher GE is in charge of discipline. Usually, he likes to stroll around here when he has nothing to do. As soon as the boy who was still blushing heard this, his face instantly changed. He turned and ran towards the teaching building, looking at his back. I was stunned in place. Chloe. Ryan called me. Why haven't you thrown away the love letter yet? Do you really want to be caught by Teacher GE? In a panic, I threw the love letter into a ditch nearby. Teacher GE rushed over angrily. Where are people dating? He looked at me suspiciously. I only felt cold sweat coming down. Ryan shouted again from above, Teacher GE. The little girl is reciting English words here. I was wrong. As soon as Teacher GE saw him, his brows wrinkled. Ryan, it's you again. Are you deliberately making fun of me? Just you wait. Saying that, he angrily picked up a stick from the ground and rushed up. Ryan looked down at me. Chloe. Bro has identified a scumbag for you. You're welcome. After saying that, he turned and ran, and staged a pursuit battle with Teacher GE in the corridor. I looked at the love letter that had been completely soaked in the ditch. I only felt a hint of soreness in my heart. I thought, does Ryan have any objections to me? Girls and adolescents are always sensitive. So after that, I always started to avoid him intentionally or unintentionally. After he graduated from high school, we rarely saw each other. My thoughts returned. I let out a long breath. I closed my eyes and forced myself to sleep for a while. 10 when I woke up. Neither Renee or Ryan had gotten up yet. After a simple wash, I went out and bought some breakfast. As soon as I opened the door, I heard Renee's scream, Chloe. I tell you. She ran towards me. Ryan quickly chased after her and covered her mouth with one hand and dragged her back. Ryan. Let go. Renee struggled free from his restraint with flailing arms. She rushed in front of me again. Chloe. I'll tell you a big joke. Ryan. This old tree is actually in bloom. As soon as her words fell, my hand trembled and the steamed bun in my hand almost fell to the ground. Renee didn't notice. Pointing at Ryan, whose face didn't look good, she laughed wildly. I just saw him shaving there. He also sprayed men's perfume on his clothes. I'm dying of laughter. I was silent for a moment and reached out and tugged at her clothes. Renee. Don't laugh. If you keep laughing, your brother might really hit you. Renee has never been one to listen to advice. She excitedly circled in front of me. I tell you, he definitely has someone he likes. At such an age. Still showing off like a peacock. Ryan took a step forward, grabbed her collar and dragged her into the room. A few seconds later, Renee's scream came from the room. It can only be said that this beating is not unjustified. I originally wanted to find an opportunity to have a good talk with Ryan. But this opportunity is so hard to find. Ryan only stayed at home for half a day and then returned to the team. My parents also came back from their trip. Since the problem of the original residence has not been solved yet, they rented a house outside temporarily. Naturally, I moved out of Renee's house. A month passed in a flash. My life is gradually getting on track. Since I left my last company, I have rested for a long time. I received news of a new interview a few days ago. Early this morning, I took the prepared interview materials and tidied myself up properly before going out. The appointed time happened to coincide with the morning rush hour. I stood in the subway. There were people all around and it was extremely crowded. There was a bald middle-aged man sitting directly opposite me. He looked up at me. His scrutinizing gaze made me extremely uncomfortable. I slightly tilted my body and tried my best to avoid his sight. But after a few seconds, I found that he took out his phone and the camera was pointed at me from time to time. My face darkened. I directly reached out and blocked his phone. "What are you taking pictures of? Why? Am I so good-looking?" Probably didn't expect me to be so direct. A trace of panic flashed across his face. He pretended to be calm and put down his phone. "I don't understand what you're saying." I pointed to his phone. "Delete my photo." While speaking, the subway arrived at the station. The man gave me a frivolous look and got up and got off directly, leaving a sentence, "Crazy. Me. I really can't tolerate this temper." I got off the train following him. He moved quickly. He quickly left the station with the flow of people. I chased after him for a while before I saw him. That bald man in the blue plaid shirt. He's a pervert. Everyone help catch him. I let out a roar, and all the passers-by looked over. The man cursed loudly and took off running. Immediately, some just people around reached out to stop him. Seeing that the situation was not good, the man changed direction and ran directly towards me. I was calling the police and didn't notice for a moment. Soon, the man rushed in front of me. He was so furious that he was about to grab me. At the critical moment, a hand grabbed my arm and pulled me away directly. I was still in shock and turned to look. A very familiar face appeared in front of me. I was so surprised that my voice changed tone. "Ryan?" 11 Coincidentally, the fire brigade where Ryan is located happened to be conducting training nearby. Several strong firefighters quickly pinned the man to the ground. When I came back after making the police call, Ryan had already got his mobile phone. He flipped through the photo album, and his frown deepened. Subconsciously, he was about to delete the photos. I quickly stopped him. "Don't delete it now. This is the evidence of his secret photography." There were many secretly taken photos in the man's mobile phone, including upward shots, downward shots, and many photos of girls, underskirts. He was pressed down and couldn't move. But his mouth was still not honest. He glared at me fiercely. "What are you being so noble for? You dress like this. Isn't it for men to see?" I looked down at my own clothes with a black line on my face. It's a proper office worker's attire. I don't know what stimulated him. I was about to scold him back. But Ryan's fist was faster than mine. He punched the man in the face. There was a moment of silence around. Immediately, the man began to howl. "You actually dared to hit people? I will call the police." Ryan patted his face. "The police are on the way. And I didn't hit you. Didn't I have to use force to suppress you because you tried to resist?" The onlookers around said in unison, "Yes. We all saw it." The man. I couldn't help but look sideways at Ryan. His confident and arrogant tone faintly reminded me of him when he was a teenager. That him who once made me couldn't help but be attracted. Ryan turned his head and looked over. In the eye contact, I guiltily looked away. "Is it still in time?" he asked me. I was stunned for a moment. "Huh?" He pointed to my document bag. "Your interview. Is it still in time?" I was shocked and looked down at my mobile phone. Immediately, 10,000 alpacas roared through my heart. "It's over. I'm going to be late." 12 Ryan handed the secret photographer to his teammates and drove me to the interview location himself. Along the way, Both he and I were very silent. His car drove steadily and quickly. And we arrived soon. When I opened the car door and got off, Ryan called out to me, "Chloe, I wish you success in your interview." I smiled at him. "Thanks for your good wishes." Ryan took a deep look at me and the corners of his mouth slightly rose. "Let's have a meal together sometime. I have something to tell you." Ryan's mouth seemed to be blessed. The interview process was extremely smooth. The HR said that I could start working smoothly next Monday. But until I started working, Ryan didn't contact me. After waiting for a few more days, I suddenly realized that my current state was not right. From time to time every day, I looked at my mobile phone. Whenever there was a message coming in, I would start to look forward to it nervously. This state made me feel a little uneasy. I didn't want to be affected by Ryan's emotions anymore, so I was ready to take the initiative. I called Ryan, but the person who answered the phone was Renee. She was a little surprised. "Chloe? Why are you looking for my brother?" I was stunned. "Why are you answering?" Renee explained. "My brother was injured on a mission some time ago and is now in the hospital. I am taking care of him here. He has gone for an examination now, and didn't take his mobile phone." "Hello? Chloe? Are you listening? Hello?" I was holding the mobile phone but didn't know what to say. I just felt like there was a lump in my throat. All that echoed in my mind was Renee's words. "My brother is injured. I think I must be sick. The disease is called liking. And the cause is Ryan." 13. I got the address of the hospital where Ryan was from Renee. After work, I hurried over. But when I hurriedly arrived at the door of the ward, I realized that I had come too hastily. I didn't even bring a fruit basket. What kind of hospital visit is this? Somewhat annoyed, I walked around at the door, until Ryan's voice came from behind. "Chloe?" I paused and turned to look incredulously. Ryan was wearing a hospital gown and standing not far behind me on crutches. There was surprise in his eyes. "Why are you here?" He took a few steps towards me. I subconsciously reached out to help him. When my palm touched his arm, I felt his body stiffen. Then it quickly returned to normal. I explained. "I heard from Renee that you were injured." Ryan smiled. "Just a few fractures. It's not a big problem. I can go home in a few days." I helped him into the ward. Looking around, I asked in confusion, "Where's Renee?" "Ryan, she went home to get something for me." He lay on the hospital bed and I took a chair and sat beside him. As soon as I looked up, I met his gaze. We looked at each other in silence. And the atmosphere suddenly became a bit awkward. It was Ryan who spoke first. "I'm sorry." I was stunned for a moment. "Huh?" Ryan looked at me. "I said I would contact you before. But it was delayed until now. I'm really sorry for standing you up." I smiled and pointed at his leg. "You can't help it." Ryan let out a long breath and leaned against the head of the bed. After a few seconds of silence, he suddenly lowered his head and chuckled softly. "Chloe, did I really not talk in my sleep that night?" My heart suddenly started beating violently. Trying to stay calm, I said, "Why ask this all of a sudden?" Ryan looked over. His eyes filled with complicated emotions. He said, "You may not know. There is a surveillance camera in our living room." Me. So my lie was exposed just like that? Seeing my somewhat embarrassed look, the smile in Ryan's eyes grew even stronger. And I couldn't stand him being so smug. So I forced myself to look at him calmly and raised my eyes. "So, Ryan, do you like me?" Ryan's smile slightly froze. He stared at me in a daze and then laughed. "You don't call me brother anymore now." I didn't speak. Just looked at him without blinking. Ryan turned his head aside and cleared his throat awkwardly. "Yes. I like you." 14. Ryan said he liked me. He liked me at first sight. At that time, he was squatting on the wall, and I was standing at the end of the alley. I looked up at him. He whistled at me like a rogue. "What are you looking at?" I never thought that he was actually covering up his nervousness at that time. Ryan slightly raised his head, seemingly recalling. Later. I would always pass by your class from time to time. In fact, I just wanted to see you. He asked me, didn't you notice? I was puzzled. What? Ryan, the lollipops I gave you and Renee were always lychee flavored. Renee doesn't like lychees. Only I like lychees. I suddenly felt my face getting hot and awkwardly averted my gaze from him. Ryan was still talking. Staying in the internet cafe deliberately until very late is to wait for you to come and find me. When other boys confessed to you. I was both envious and jealous. So I deliberately made a sound to disrupt. Later. When I heard that you like boys who are mature, stable and give people a sense of security. So I became a firefighter. Ryan glanced at me and added, I said so much and don't mean anything else. You don't have to feel any burden either. I just think I should give an account to myself at 18. I looked at him quietly, and didn't speak. I thought, should I also give an account to myself at 18? Before I could finish speaking, I heard Renee's loud voice. Brother, where did you put your certificate? Why can't I find it? I looked at Ryan in horror. In the exchange of glances, he silently lifted the quilt. I subconsciously got under it. Only after getting in did I suddenly realize. What was I hiding for? There's no need. But Renee had already come in. At this time, climbing out again would seem even stranger. I huddled under Ryan's quilt. The space was narrow, and my hand inevitably touched his body. Ryan was talking to Renee. He was very good at pretending, and there was no sign of anything unusual. They didn't talk for long. I heard Renee's voice. I'll go to Mom and Dad's place and look for it for you again. Her high-heeled shoe sounds gradually faded away. As soon as I breathed a sigh of relief, I heard her voice again. By the way, brother, tell the person in your quilt to come out quickly. Don't suffocate. Also, you to think about excuse as well and explain to me how to explain this. Me. Ryan. Now the sound of high-heeled shoes completely disappeared. I carefully got out from under the quilt. As soon as I looked up, I was facing Ryan's gaze. We were extremely close. So close that we could feel each other's breath. The atmosphere suddenly became ambiguous and charming. I grinned sheepishly. I seemed to hear your heartbeat. Ryan's eyes flickered slightly and his voice was a bit hoarse. You heard wrong. I looked at him and didn't speak. A few seconds later, Ryan leaned over and came closer to me. Following that, there was an overwhelming kiss. His hot palm wrapped around my waist and pulled me into his arms. 15 in the coffee shop. Renee turned her head. Humph. I shook her arm. Renee. Humph. I sighed. You have to listen to my explanation for this. Renee looked at me angrily. When did my brother, that pig, steal you? This big cabbage? That is to say, I really have deep feelings. Under Renee's sharp gaze, I told her everything in detail. In the end, Renee's mouth was wide open enough to fit an egg. What? Ryan had his eyes on you so early? Cunning. So cunning. For so many years, he's been hiding his feelings. And with one move, he directly won you over. As Renee was talking, she started wailing again. My best friend has become my sister-in-law. I'm so miserable. I was puzzled. Why are you miserable? From now on, when you quarrel with your brother, there will always be someone unconditionally on your side. Don't you think it's great? Renee was stunned for a moment. Then she exclaimed in surprise. What you said is so damn reasonable. A short extra episode later on, I once asked Renee a question. How did you find out that there was something wrong between me and your brother? Even if she had found someone hiding on the bed at that time, she shouldn't have immediately thought of me. Renee blinked at me. Because of the note. Me? Note? Yes. Renee pointed at her phone. At that time, you called my brother and I answered it. Do you remember? Of course I remember this. It was at that time that I saw the note my brother gave you. I was very curious. What is it? Renee couldn't help but raise the corners of her mouth. She leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Lychee-flavored lollipop. 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 Lollipop."